Okay, hi. My name is Heather Houston, and I'm here to talk to you about youthful classroom strategies and learning new classroom strategies for special education students. Mark, could you click the next one for me? Okay, so a little bit about me is my name is Heather Houston. I currently service 7th and 8th grade Arches students at Harshman Magna Middle School in a self-contained classroom. I've been in special education since 2018, and I've had the opportunity to serve in multiple roles as teacher assistant, resource, inclusion, co-teaching, etc. So I've done a little bit of everything. And I included a picture of my son. This is my middle son. And the reason why I included him is because he has an IEP, and he's in special education. So when he hears that his mom is also a special education teacher, it makes him feel a little bit closer to me. He actually has a couple of disabilities. His first one is OHI because he has this sickle cell. So it affects the way that he learns if he gets too dehydrated. Um, he also has a speech impairment and a language impairment. And so he started out with just speech and language, and then he had a teacher that he really got along with, and she really invested in him. And she saw that when he didn't have enough water, he was easily distracted. He would look around the classroom. It was hard for him to focus. So she started to realize that if he stays hydrated, then he learns better. And it just allowed me to really, connect and say, hey, you know what? Everything is trial and error. It's important to know your students. It's important to pay attention and observe what helps and what doesn't help. And so I just wanted to include that for you. Hey, Mark, could you click to the next one? Okay, so before I even get started, all of this is based off, to me, the foundation is the number one rule is relationship building. I love the famous quote from Theodore Roosevelt that says, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I truly live by that motto, because if students know that you care, they'll do anything for you. Even if the situation is tough or not favorable for them, they more than likely will listen because they know you're coming from a caring place versus a place where you don't really like them or they feel like you're picking on them. But if they know you come from like a foundation of love, they tend to do whatever for you. Relationship building for me can start with just kind of asking them about their interests. I like going to games or going to events that they're involved in. I like kind of getting to know, like, do they have siblings? Sometimes I just ask them, like, how was your day? What you eat for breakfast? Sometimes students, nothing's wrong with them. They just haven't eaten or they didn't get enough sleep last night. And some students, they go home and they're adults because they have to take care of little brothers and sisters. Their parents are working all the time. And so they don't know whether to be an adult or be a child. So it's like they're expected to be an adult at home, but then they have to be a child here in school. So just kind of getting to know that and building that relationship and listening, showing them that I care typically goes a longer way when it comes to academics and when it comes to behaviors or anything like that. When it comes to culture in your classroom, relationship building is really big. So that's why I made that the number one rule. Okay, next slide, Mark. Okay, so according to Article 7, Article 7 is a huge document that's really thick. If you have some time and you want to read it, it's always available. You can find it online, you can find it other places. So there's our 13 disabilities that qualify for SPED services, but I really want to focus on useful strategies for about 7 of the disabilities, because the other ones deal with physical disabilities like deafness, blindness, or if they have a physical impairment. So a lot of times we outsource for those disabilities. So I just kind of want to touch on the most common ones that we see on an everyday basis, and just some strategies that either I've experienced or I heard was helpful. And also too, there's probably going to be some things that you can think about while I'm giving the presentation that you find are helpful. So that's going to kind of be the agenda for this session. Okay, next slide, Mark. All right. So the session disabilities I will talk about is specific learning disability. A lot of times it'll be classified as SLD. We have other health impairment. So you sometimes will see OHI. We have autism spectrum disorder, and you'll see ASD, or sometimes you'll see AUT for just autism. We have emotional disturbance, ED, speech versus language impairment. They are different. A lot of times people kind of use them interchangeably, but they actually are different. And then we have intellectual disability, ID, and then multiple disabilities, and that's when you kind of have more than one. So we'll talk about those in this session. Okay, next slide. All right. So I kind of want to touch on like a medical diagnosis versus an IEP eligibility. So the medical diagnosis is made more by the doctor. And IEP eligibility is made by a team of various school professionals and also the student and their parents. And then whoever decides that, the paraprofessionals, maybe a counselor, administration, general education teacher, special education teacher, and the parents and the child, that's kind of the CCC team. So that's, that's the team that you'll see that kind of makes the decisions on students' eligibility. Um, then we have a criteria states that to qualify for special education services, a child must have one of the 13 disabilities as defined by the IDEA, and the impact of the disability must create a need for services. So, a lot of times, just because you have a medical diagnosis does not mean you automatically qualify for an IEP. The only time that you might, so there's some students that have autism, but if it doesn't impact their learning significantly, where we feel like they, really need extra assistance, then they may not have an IP. They may just be autistic and be on the spectrum, but we won't even know. But sometimes if it's like really that, detrimental to their learning, then that's when we seek out an IP or seek out getting them evaluated. So the IP team looks for a discrepancy between performance and ability. We look for limited progress or deficiency in cognitive areas. We look for evidence of emotional or behavioral disturbances. And then we look for problems with fine or gross motor skills. And a lot of times, if they have like fine and gross motor skills, like they might see occupational therapy or some type of outpatient, um, somebody who provides services like a contractor that the school might contract to, to service on the best of our ability. Go ahead, Mark. You can switch to. Thank you so much. Okay, the first one we're going to talk about is a specific learning disability, SLD. That can be in math, that can be in ELA, and that can also be in both. The definition, you can do it with Article 7, but a lot of times it's their weaknesses. They struggle with working memory and retention. Like they may become frustrated, lose interest in school, avoid challenges. They may have low self esteem, emotional problems. A lot of times with low self-esteem, because they feel like something is wrong, but they're not quite sure. So if they feel like, okay, I can't completely do this on my own, or I just read something and I don't really understand what's going on, they may shut down and withdraw, or be depressed. Sometimes they get angry. So some useful classroom strategies that I've used for them is like breaking learning tasks into small steps. So a lot of times I like to chunk material, and I tell myself all the time, I feel like everybody has learned to adapt to how they learn. So I feel like everybody kind of has a disability in a way. Because say if I read something and I just read it straight through, I'll stop and ask myself, what did I just read? So a lot of times I will read paragraph by paragraph, and I will chunk it, the material, and I say, okay, what did I just read? What is it asking me? A lot of times I try to say, okay, I'll look at the title, then I'll look at the text. But sometimes the title is in the main idea is in the title. So I just try to teach these strategies to keep from being overwhelmed. I probe regularly to check understanding, especially when reading to my students. Sometimes if I'm reading in my head, I'm I just have to read out loud. So these are things that I learned to accommodate. And you'll find that you have things that you accommodate. And these are just some strategies we want to teach our students and saying, hey, you know what? You're just, nothing's wrong with you. All you're needing to do is figure out the best way that you learn. And you don't just learn one specific way. Sometimes you learn by hands on, like in math, but then you can read something in ELA and understand it. So there's not one specific way, but just learning how to adapt so that you learn, the best way you can. Hey, Mark, could you switch the thing for me? Okay, so SLD continue, just some more strategies like providing regular quality feedback. This helps with the shutting down and the withdrawal and the low self-esteem. So if I'm constantly giving feedback, I usually try to give 3 positives to every negative, just to keep them on track. Present information visually and verbally. Sometimes we are auditory. Sometimes we learn by just watching. Sometimes we learn by kinetic, by doing. So these are all every lesson I try to hit all of those learning areas. So using diagrams, graphics, and pictures, videos help. And then provide some independent practice. Maybe 2 or 3 questions, practicing those specific skills to see how much they are retaining and how much they are understanding. um, and then modeling as well, because it's like, wait, sometimes students say, wait, hold up, huh? And so modeling helps too. And that's once again learning by doing, learning by watching, trying to hit all those areas. And this is the most common disability that I know I have witnessed in the classroom. A lot of students will have specific learning disability, so they might benefit from like some push out, push in, but they have their LRE. They're mostly in the classroom with their general education students majority of the day. They just need a couple of maybe pull outs, push ins, and maybe like a graphic organizer to organize their thoughts, or like a hundreds chart, just little things that just kind of like really assist. And then it allows them to be able to do it independently. They just need those scaffolds. Um, so this, once again, this could be in ELA, math, or both. Hey, Mark, could you switch for me? Okay, so like I talked about my son Jay's other health impairment. This could be anything that physically that might be wrong, or that they might struggle with. Maybe Asperger's, maybe anything that ADHD. You'll see that a lot of times under other health impairment. If they struggle with focusing, a lot of times that you'll see that labeled as other health impairment. And so their weaknesses, like I said, attention, hydration, alertness, fatigue. Sometimes they need to get up and do things. So what I like to do is, because it takes them longer, because they get tired sooner, because sometimes they can't maintain that stamina of focus for a longer period of time, then they get that extended time. Because they can do the task, but they just might need longer to get it done. Also simplifying the task so that they're not like overwhelmed, and that helps with alertness and that helps with attention. Also too, assign seating close to the teacher. A lot of times I try to sit them closer to an anchor chart. A lot of times if they sit closer to me, they can hear a lot better. Especially if they feel like they're getting attention, then they're less likely to veer off or do other things. I post daily and weekly schedules. Sometimes they like to really know. This goes for my students with autism as well. They kind of like to know a schedule. They know what's going on. Provide structure and consistency. They do, like, every students really love when there's a schedule and you follow the schedule. And then allow for use of assistive technology if applicable, because that's not always the case. Okay, Mark, go ahead and switch for me. Thank you. The next one is ASD. This is my favorite one because it reminds me of some students that I have. So my situation is I struggle with time, and I also struggle with, what did I just say? What am I supposed to be doing? I lose my thoughts all the time. And a lot of times my students with ASD, they like regimen, and they like are very structured. So they will remind me, what am I supposed to be doing? So, and they are routine. So I have a student that said, Miss Houston, we're supposed to watch your morning announcements. And I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot. Morning announcements. Miss Houston, let me turn on your computer. Let me turn on a projector. So a lot of times I give them jobs because they keep me on task, and it makes them feel important, and it builds that relationship with them. So autism is a wide spectrum. So a lot of times in the past it was, oh, I'm not as autistic as this person. This person is more autistic than me. And that is not true. If you have any form of autism, that's autism is autism. It's not like, it's a wide spectrum. So some of the weaknesses, they get fixated on certain things. Sometimes relationship building, like they kind of are slower to build those relationships. They're very literal. Sarcasm doesn't really work with them. They're like, wait, what? No, it's this and it's this. They're thinkers. They don't really like change. And if you do change, make sure you tell them ahead of time. And it's nice to have a visual schedule. A lot of times they might have sensory, so I have like fidgets, or they can fidget with things, or I try to have like them get a chance to move around, or sometimes they want to rock. So wiggly chairs is helpful. So I like to build a relationship and talk about their interests. I have a student with autism that is a cheerleader. So if I'm given a scenario, I'll say like this person, and they like to cheer. And so this is, they do 26 games, and then they miss 3 games. So if they went to 26 games and they missed 3 games, how many games are left? So I try to make it relatable for them. And this will increase their motivation because it's something they like to talk about. It builds that relationship once again. Sorry, my light just keeps going out. And then I try to avoid sensory overload. So frequent breaks, not a lot of information, a lot of repetition, constantly building. So the next day, if I introduce a lesson, I'll go back and review before I introduce the lesson to bridge that gap from the material that I taught previously. And then using visuals, anchor charts, schedules, time. Sometimes I put it on their binder. Like if they switch classes, I'll print out their schedule, put it on their binder so they know exactly where to go. Or I'll just always have it visible. So that just helps with them. Okay, next slide for me, Mark. So be predictable, keep language concrete, don't be too wordy. That's that economy of language. Like instead of saying, well, da 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 da, do quick lightning redirections, and keep your instructions quick and light. Sometimes I know I can talk a lot, so I try to work on that. Teach directly, teach social skills, um, schedules, videos. For my younger students, they like timers. I always tell them, okay, I'm going to give you 10 minutes to get 5 problems done, and then when the timer goes off, we'll come back together, and so I try to tell them exactly what's going on, give a timer so they know what to expect, and then I reiterate the instructions, have them do a check for understanding, like a thumbs up if everybody knows what to do, things like that. Those are things I like to help. Some are hypersensitive, like they don't like loud noise, or the lights are too bright, so sometimes soft lighting or headphones. And my students are pretty good at like helping each other with what they struggle with. So say if they're like, okay, everybody be quiet because this student doesn't handle noise that well, that always helps. Some are hyposensitive, like they have sensory where they need to be moving. They need to have fidgets, and they need a light snack. They need to constantly move. And so I try to make sure that I accommodate both in the classroom. Okay, thanks, Mark. So the next one is emotional disturbance. This one is not as common, but if you are in a self-contained classroom, or you might, deal with more severe behaviors, you'll see emotional disturbance. Um, Sometimes you'll see like mood dysregulation disorder, like they just struggle monitoring their mood. You might see like a little bit of ODD, like some defiance going on. But they struggle with that, like balancing emotions. Sometimes they don't know why they're feeling a certain kind of way, and in that moment, like they need breaks. They need to be able to get away. I always try to teach strategies for them to state what is going on, or say, okay, a consequence, or if they, what should I have done better, so just asking them to be accountable. So I like to keep like activities and rules simple and clear. No one likes to be completely overwhelmed with a lot of words, so that does help. Even with, I respond better with that as well. Fair treatment for all is very important. Treating everybody the same and assuming the best. A lot of times, I think about the student first versus the disability first. So I think about, oh, that is a student with autism, not an autistic student, because autistic student means you're just labeled. That's an emotional disturbance student. So that means that the disability comes before you meet them. So that tends to be an issue. And then use motivational strategies, telling them that they are not their disability, they are not what, their eligibility, they are, we're trying to move them towards independence, move them towards growth, move them towards, so, that's what we want to see, progress. So we're not staying stagnant, we're constantly growing. So I try to be motivational as much as I can. Okay, next slide for me. Uh, yes. So now I have speech versus language impairment. So I learned this with my son, where kids with speech disorder, they may struggle with like articulation, speech, being able to say like different words. I know when I was younger, I couldn't say like the G word. My teacher would always say, "Oh, have her get some gum and then try to say the G word." So, but ultimately, sometimes you can grow out of having a speech. Fluency, sometimes stuttering. Sometimes when you're stuttering, you're thinking faster than you're speaking. So it might come off as a stutter. And then like the voice, the quality of speech, loudness. Sometimes students that have speech disorders, they kind of mumble, or they don't feel as confident in their voice. So you have to work on them being confident and being louder. Now, students with language impairment, they struggle and have trouble understanding or being understood. Sometimes they have a problem with saying what's wrong or being verbal, and that's written or non-written. Um, uh, Give me 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. I got a phone call. Okay, so useful strategies for language impairment is moving kids closer to you as well, so that they can hear you. Um, Even if they need to raise their hand, you'll hear them. You can always clarify what's going on. Make sure kids understand and write down assignments correctly to avoid like confusion. So that's why I have them sit closer to the board too. So if something is written on a board or the overhead, like directions or homework, things like that, they can write those things down. I like to give extra assignments and extra time to complete assignments and make up work when needed. Say if they struggle, because say if they have that barrier of not being able to write, exactly how they feel. A lot of times, a graphic organizer may help with that as well. But a lot of times, my speech and my language impairment students are some of the ones that score the highest. In my on testing. So they're always some of the sweetest students that you'll meet. So these are one of my favorites. I love them all though, but language and speech impairment, it's kind of cool to see the growth and see them grow and learn how to vocalize how they feel and their thought process, and being able to write things down, how they, how they're thinking, and explain their answers, especially when it comes to writing essays and things like that. So I try to give a longer time for that. Next slide for me. Okay, so I substitute written papers for projects sometimes if they have that, because sometimes because of speech or because they stutter, they don't want to stand in front of people because that they're afraid of being laughed at or made fun of. So I know I had a student and he was in 8th grade, and there was a social studies project where he had to come up with a business and do a budget and things like that. So he was scared to do his project. So he just said, no, I'm not going to do it. But I know how much work he had put into the presentation because I, was able to help him with it, and I saw the finished product. And so I asked his teacher, I said, she said, hey, so and so, do you want to do your thing? And he said, no, no, I'm okay. And so I said, hey, do you mind if I take him to another room, have him do his presentation, and I record it, and then I can submit that? And she allowed him to be able to do it. And I was very proud of him. I helped him out with a few words here and there, but overall, I was just super proud that he had the confidence to get up there on one on one, and we were able to get the presentation done. So sometimes, in education, I'm learning that you have to be flexible. Everything is not concrete. It's ultimately to see our students win. Using technology makes things easier a lot of times, especially when they might have some um, motor skills, fine motor skills. So writing longer essays can make their hand hurt, or be a little bit tougher to because they're worried about spelling and penmanship. It's hard to read. So sometimes just typing it up is easier. Also, too, sometimes having a scribe can help too. Um, then them having vocal recognition, being able to say it, and having to have it type it out. Also, just being patient when your students speak in class, because they're like 20 times scared, or just as scared as their other counterparts. Public speaking is really hard for students. It's really hard for people. They say that's like the number one fear. So just being patient with your students, and encourage classmates to be patient as well. Talk about and celebrate differences. Students with speech or language problems want to be accepted like everyone else, but sometimes they're targeted by others who don't see them as different, or they say that's why you can't read, or that's why, and just kind of celebrating the fact that they may struggle in this, but they're very intelligent in math, or they're very intelligent in this area. And then just saying a zero policy, zero tolerance for bullying. I know bullying happens a lot in special education. And some of the ones that are bullying have a disability themselves. So just kind of getting, setting that tone for the culture, that we all have differences. We all have things we struggle with. Nobody's smarter than anyone else. Nobody's dumber than anyone else. And that behavior will not be tolerated. So I constantly always do that in my classroom because culture is very important. Okay, Mark, if you can switch. So right now I'm in a self-contained classroom, and a lot of my students, their primary disability. So primary is like your main disability, the one that infringes on your learning the most. Struggle with the intellectual disability, and that's just like some cognitive functioning and adaptive behavior, can be weaknesses. So I'm like, I always use small steps. I modify teaching to be more hands on. A lot of times I like to give breaks because they're with me for a longer period of time, like straight through. Sometimes like a 10-minute brain break or 3-minute brain break. Um, or having them work with a pipe cleaner, or have them like think, pair, share. Just these things to like differentiate the learning, so the learning is not just being delivered one way. um, Incorporate more physical learning activities and experiences, and start a feedback book or chart. A lot of feedback is great as well. Encourage music in the classroom. Sometimes when they're working, I'll allow them to listen to music, or I'll play music whole class. And I provide visuals, for that visual stimulus, and get them to where they see material presented in various different ways. Okay, Mark. And then our final one that we have is our multiple disabilities. And our multiple disabilities is when there's like you're dealing with more than one. So you have your primary, but you might have a secondary. You might have up maybe sometimes I see like three, four different disabilities. And sometimes it's like, which disability am I dealing with today? Because you'll see, like, okay, you may have a mild intellectual disability, but today I'm seeing more behavior. Or some now I'm seeing more of your ASD, your autism coming out today. So it's just, primary, secondary, and weakness is instability. So it's like, which disability is evident? What's challenging today? And when you take the time to learn your students and build that relationship, you'll get better at really, because each disability sometimes has its own strategies, but some kind of across the board, you can use the same strategies for various different disabilities. And then I like to look for the primary disability or the one that's more evident or just affecting the students learning the most. And then just try to act on that or build goals towards that. I also have them kind of do a reflection of strategies that they feel worked. What's helping? What do you feel like you were struggling with today? And then it's kind of like we are in this together, because I definitely want them to be a part of what's going on. I want them to have a say so in their learning. I want them to be aware of what accommodations they need, because they ultimately need to learn how to advocate for themselves. Advocate, because I'm learning as a special education teacher, especially sometimes with my gen ed or my admin, like we advocate, but it's like special education isn't the enemy of general education. We need us all. So just kind of getting us be on a co-teaching method and on a team to make sure that students are getting the best services and the best help to promote them to growth and success. Okay, Mark. All right, so we have come to the end of our presentation. I hope that you did learn something, if not more than one thing. I'm always learning. I go to any PD that I can get my hands on, because special education is constantly changing. Special education is constantly, it's like you never really get completely on top of it. So you have to be a forever student. So, in summary, I want you to love on your students, listen, pay attention, and care. Be prepared to work with short attention spans. Be flexible and be prepared to manage constant change. Teach effectively. Always differentiate your lessons, making sure you're hitting your higher students, your middle, your low, and more importantly, self care. But that's another story. So I appreciate your time, and I hope that you did learn something today. Bye.